Hello, hello. Welcome to season 5 of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I help entrepreneurs make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what's important to them. I see way too many business people letting their businesses or their jobs run their lives versus them figuring out with real clarity about what they want their lives to look like and having their job or their business be the conduit to have that life that they absolutely love. I want to thank you so much for listening in to season 5. This season is filled with motivation, inspiration, leadership, and wisdom from some super interesting guests, and myself included. My hope is through our shared experiences, you will see a bit of yourself and move further into leading your own lit up life. If you're enjoying this podcast, please feel free to share with others and leave a rating, and a comment or two would be awesome too. Let's get going. Thanks again for being a part of our community.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity.
Hello, hello. This is Debbie Heiser back with another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. Thank you for listening in today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Debbie Heiser. I help entrepreneurs make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what's important to them. I see way too many people leading lives that they don't feel lit up, they don't feel excited about. And partially too, as business people, sometimes we let the business run our lives versus knowing what we want our life to look like and then having the business or our W-2 jobs be the conduit to that life. So with that, I am in kind of not really a series, but I've gone on this theme this month in January about the push and the pull. And for those of you that haven't listened to the previous episodes, one of them was about, it's like a string pulling your heart forward. That's what's emerging, having some patience to see what's coming. And that desire that pulls you forward. The push comes from behind, and part of that pull is inspiration. The push sometimes is that needing some motivation, and it's about finding that sweet spot in between. And sometimes we can push too hard, and so what happens is the string that is our pulling us forward gets broken like a guitar string, and gets all tangled up. And what happens is then it gets constrictive, and we start to constrict and get smaller. And then we have these imposter syndromes and all these other things. So the next one, I talked about lessons I learned on a horse about kind of this push and pull mentality as well, this receiving as well as taking action. And a lot of this has to do with the law of polarity. And for those of you that have been listeners, you've heard me talk about this before. It's my jam. And for those of you that are new, I teach a lot on the universal laws. And the universal law of polarity says everything is here and it's here now. And it's here in form, but what you see and what I see might be two different things. So if I held up a book and you saw the front side of the book, it looks different than the back side of the book. It doesn't mean that it neither exists. They both exist at the same time. There is nothing that is a half of something. There is wholeness. And so today, I want to talk a little bit more about this push and this pull with the law of polarity and a little different topic. It was interesting. I was working with a client this morning, and it was a VIP check-in. So it's a little bit longer kind of meeting. So we pulled a card. I like to pull intention cards and cards that give a little bit of meaning. And this one was about deep replenishment. And I thought, oh, this is what I'm going to talk about, because I've talked to a lot of people that, particularly over the last few years, with all of when I say chaos, just all of the dividing factors, all of the things that have been going on in our world, it feels very divisive. Sometimes it feels very like this polarity that's happening, and a lot of walls being put up between people. But what I want to talk about is really then, how do you find the sweet spot between those two sides? So as an example, this card talked about retreat, rest, and be held. And it talks about the fact that the most selfless, not selfish, although Heidi Mitro, who is a guest coming up, talks about the word selfish means more of self. And so like, why wouldn't we want to show up as more of ourselves? And so, but selfless, the most selfless thing you can do is to fill up your own inner well. And so when I think about this, I think about an example of a vase that I heard about where we all have spirit, right? For me, that's God. Other people call it universe. Other people call it Buddha, whatever it works for you. Don't get caught up in the semantics. We all have this unending supply that comes to us. So if you think about yourself as a vase, a container of some sort, this comes into us, and what we end up doing is we pour out to other people. And I hear that a lot, even in churches. I hear that, oh, I'm pouring out myself. Well, you know what? I disagree with that, because what happens is when we pour the vase, we cut off the supply of energy. We cut off the supply of love. We cut off the supply that fills us to be able to go serve in the world. And so what happens then is we kind of jump into the victim game, because we become a little bit of a martyr by saying, I'm pouring out into other people. And unfortunately, what happens is when you pour out, you're emptying your tank, you're emptying your well. And so it can become resentful. You can start to resent what it is that you're doing or the people that you're doing it for. And so I don't know about you, I've done it before where I've said yes to things that I really didn't want to do. That's an example of pouring out instead of standing tall. And another thing you've heard me say before, some words that kind of get me because words have energy, and the word boundaries. Sometimes I get a little shy about that word. And I guess partly because sometimes we need some black and white. But boundaries to me build up walls versus this idea of standing tall, knowing who I am. So as a leader, as someone that is helping other people step into their lit up lives, it's important that I know who I am. So this constant journey of learning and learning about myself is really critical, because the more self-aware I am, and not in a narcissistic way, but the more self-aware I am of things that trigger me, of things that bring me joy, of things that fill my bucket, then the more I'm able to help other people, because then I don't put up boundaries or walls between myself and someone else. I can look at you and say, I'm so glad that's working for you. I'm super happy about that. I appreciate you telling it to me, but it's just not for me at this time. And I can say that with confidence without then also making the other person wrong. A lot of times what I see when people are trying to set boundaries, they get nervous about it. And so it comes across very like harsh sometimes, but ultimately sometimes a boundary place, the way people then articulate what it is that they want comes across as a judgment. So I have to know what I want. I have to know what I want in relationships with people. I need to know what I want out of my business. I need to know what kind of like what I want as far as like how I want my spiritual relationship to look. I need to understand like what do I want when it comes to being a contributing member of my community, right? Like I was on a lot of boards. Now I show up and I donate and I try to be on some boards and help with different things. And that's the way I want to show up. I want to support the community I live in. So knowing what you want is super important to being able to replenish, because we get tired, we get depleted because we don't know what we want. We're not clear even in our own head. So therefore, a lot of times too, what we want might be attention. What we want might be feeling valued. So therefore we say yes to things that we feel like we're being valued, but in fact, it's just keeping us busy. And that's not really what we wanted to do. So just kind of think about that. And so part of this with this vase too is then when we stand tall and we get this unending supply, we start to have overflow. So we get filled up and people get our overflow. And I don't know about you, but that even energetically sounds different. People get what's bubbling up inside of us instead of oh ho hum and turning into a victim and I don't want to do this and complaint energy. And I think I've said this before, but when you complain, the part of your brain that is able to solve problems, your I always want to call it a hippopotamus, hypothalamus, actually gets smaller when you complain. So, which is ironic because the thing that could get you out of complaining and problem solving gets smaller because you are complaining. So when I think about pouring out to people, that's when I hear people complain more versus standing tall, knowing who you are, what you want. Then you can use the law of polarity to say, look, where can I find the sweet spot between replenishment and depletion? Right? If I'm standing tall, I'm feeling replenished. There might be times though, I mean, let's face it, there are weeks sometimes that I have a women's subscription connection group in town that meets 2 or 3 times a month. I teach at Gonzaga every other Monday evening from 5 to 7 online. I have a mastermind that I'm a part of with some gals that I traveled with last year that we meet a couple of Tuesdays every month. So there are times that I have things going on that my body might be tired, but my inner self is super excited about. And so, yes, I realize and I understand that I need to step back. Or like last Friday when I skied unbelievably hard and then have been paying for it all week with aches and pains in my legs. Like I realized I needed to take a break and not ski that hard 2 days in a row, right? Because 17 runs for me is usually a good 4-hour day, and I did 17 runs in 2 hours. So that tells you how much I was skiing on my perfect ski day. But anyway, let me get back to the point. Find those things that replenish you from a physical perspective, right? Like I knew I just needed to rest. I also knew that on Sunday, I didn't want to just sit there and rest. So I caught up on some email while I was putting my beamer, this bioelectric magnetic thing to help my blood flow in my right knee that was swollen, to help me replenish that. So there are times that we know from a physical perspective, from a mental perspective, if I do an event or I teach my foresight class over, well, it's not my class, but teach the foresight class over at Gonzaga, I know because I'm holding space for people that I need a couple of days of regenerative time after that, right? That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, well, part of it is what I'm talking about, where you have to understand those rhythms and the law of rhythm. But if replenishment is on one side and depletion is on the other side, where do you find, and it's not even the happy medium, but where do you find that ability to be in that sweet spot, to listen to the push and the pull that happens and allow for flow to happen, allow for it to not feel hard, but for it to feel easy, like it's just flowing like a river. Same thing with rest and action, right? There are times to act and there are times to rest. There are times to give thought to our businesses and there are times to take action on the business. We can think all sorts of things and come up with all creative things. And I have to tell you, there's 2 things that in my industry that I see a lot of times that drive me crazy. And one is calling something passive income, because I'm sorry, there's not anything that I know of that you don't have to do some bit of work, right? Like you might have to do a little bit of work and put something up there and then people are purchasing it online and it all is taking care of itself, but you have to go refresh it every once in a while. You have to take the action to set it up at the beginning. And so I think there's sometimes this idea that you can just go out and throw something out there. And then I forgot what the second one was because I was kind of on a rant there. But the point being is that we're talking about how do you get into the flow, right? And so we also, what I find interesting about this rest and action, or also this ability to receive and the ability to go act, is that we need both. And we do need to find kind of where the pull and the push meet each other in this segment, because when we don't, then we can cut off things that we're supposed to, like that we need to receive, that that abundance of whatever. But I've also been in situations where I've known people to think that it's almost like magic thinking. Oh, I'm going to manifest this and this is going to happen. Well, you also have to take action, right? It's not just magical thinking. It's not unicorns and rainbows. And so with this whole push and pull, it's about finding that spot also between this ability to receive and be open to receiving and this ability to act. You know, one of the awarenesses I recently had was when you breathe in, that's your ability to receive oxygen, receive air. And when you exhale, that's the action or the giving. And it was interesting. I found I could breathe into about 4, but then I could breathe out like 8 or 9 if I counted. And it became really interesting. And I tried really hard then to breathe in the same number as I counted as when I went out. And I finally got to it, but it was an interesting exercise to realize that I give out sometimes more than I take in and receive. And so sometimes even standing tall and knowing who you are and being self-aware and wanting to like have that unending flow of energy and unending flow come into you, sometimes we can even cut it off. So we might be standing tall, but we're not receiving it. So then the water's like sliding off of something that we have set up to stop the receiving. Hopefully that made sense. The other thing that I wanted to talk about too is this idea of like retreat, right? Like we hear retreat, replenish yourself. So retreat doesn't mean like back up from what you're doing. It means take a moment to think about what you're doing. I see a lot of business owners, I do this too, where we get in our business and we're working in the day-to-day versus stepping out and working on our business. I'll never forget having a conversation with one of my mastermind sisters about this group that she's in, where every day they have to be on a call, and the call can be anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour or more. And, you know, the comment she made to me, and I thought it was really profound, was that being on this call allowed her to learn that she wasn't treating her business, she wasn't acting as the CEO. She was too much in her business, therefore feeling like she didn't have time to be on this call, versus being on the call because it's helping her step back and work on her business instead of in her business. Like being able to strategize and have foresight about what's coming. And that's that pull forward, what's coming in the business. And so I'm going to wrap this, but basically just kind of thinking about this whole idea that do things to fill your inner well. And I don't mean just go get a massage. And when I say just, but like do the things physically that replenish you, but also think about those things that mentally, emotionally, intellectually, like I love to learn. I'm getting ready to be on a summit or on a retreat virtually for 3 days. I usually go in person. This is the first time I haven't gone in person. And yes, there's a little FOMO. I'm a little like wishing I was there, but I'm really glad I listened to myself, knowing where I was at. Also that I like to ski and I didn't want to spend 2 days traveling when I could be skiing. And so I listened to myself and I'm really glad about that. But I also find too, that while I'm sitting on this virtually, I need to do some things for myself to replenish as I'm doing it. I have this, for those of you watching on YouTube, right behind me is a little desk treadmill. And so I plan on walking on that for a couple of hours while I'm on this retreat. So with that in mind, do what you need to do to fill up your own inner well. And it's a really good indication when you're looking externally for something or someone to fill that well, that we got a little work to do inside. We'll talk more about that here in February. And with that, it's a wrap. Everybody have a fantastic end of the year. This is end of the year. Geez, I'm pushing it. End of the month of January. This is the last day in January. And let's hit February strong. Okay. See you later. Bye. Thanks so much for listening. The song Ride is co-written and sung by Miss Jackie Wilson and her collaborators Tyler Banks, David DJ Lee, and Chris Renee. And a huge shout out to them for allowing us to use this perfect song. Everyone have a fabulous week, and I'll talk to you next week.